Okay, remember where we left off was Jigsaw was spending the night at Ralphie Jordan's house, and Ralphie Jordan is fast asleep. So Jigsaw is hearing all these crazy noises. Scratch, scratch, thump, thump, thump. Whoa. All right, so let's see where we go from here. Chapter 9, The Night Visitor. Slurp! A giant tongue licked my face. Ragsy, old pal, I said. The floating eyes were his. My big, friendly, drooling, ever-loving dog. I was never so happy to get licked in all my life. My happiness quickly vanished when I heard a scream. It came from downstairs. Then nothing. Just dead silence. Don't ask me why, but I had to see what it was. I grabbed my flashlight. Ralphie was still sleeping. Come on, Rags, I whispered. My big, brave dog clip-clopped across the floor. At that moment, I was glad Rags wasn't a French poodle. I crept down the dark stairway. Thump, thump, thump. I stopped to listen. Whew! It was only the pounding of my heart. Then I heard another shout. A muffled voice cried, Get him! Get him! I jumped up when a hand suddenly grabbed my shoulder. Jigsaw? What's up? I turned. It was Ralphie. I put my finger to my lips. I think it's somewhere down here. What's down here? Ralphie asked. He was still half asleep. The ghost, I whispered. No, no, begged the voice. Ralphie smiled. Oh, that is just my father, he said. He's probably watching a basketball game. He always shouts at the players. Just then, Rags bolted down the stairs, through the living room, and into the den. Mr. Jordan was holding a bowl of pretzels. He came out to the bottom of the stairs. He squinted into the flashlight. Ralph? Jigsaw? Turn off that flashlight, will you? What are you doing up at this hour? Rags stood by his side, hoping for a pretzel. Ralphie stammered, Rags needed water, I said. Mr. Jordan gave us a funny look. He gave Rags a pretzel. Okay, boys, then right on back to bed. No more funny stuff. We went into the kitchen and I gave Rags some water. He lapped it up. Then I searched the cupboards. I found what I needed above the sink. It was a box of Rice Krispies. Can we take this upstairs? I asked Ralphie. I guess so, he said. Why? You'll see, I answered. Back in Ralphie's room, I gave Rags a bone to keep him busy. Then I poured the cereal on the floor. This is a ghost alarm, I said. If a ghost comes into the room when we're sleeping, we'll hear snap, crackle, pop, Ralphie said. For the third time that night, we crawled back into our sleeping bags. We kept all the lights on. I must have fallen asleep because I woke up to a noise. It was a step. Then another, louder and louder, closer and closer. I woke Ralphie. Something's coming, I whispered. The doorknob slowly turned. Eek! The door opened. After that, a lot of stuff happened all at once. Things got pretty mixed up. Ralphie pulled the sleeping bag over his head and started screaming, Don't eat me! Don't eat me! Rags started running around the room in circles, barking like crazy. I looked up and saw Mr. Jordan at the door. He looked pretty scared himself. He came into the room, crunch, crunch, snap, crackle, pop, crunch, and started waving his arms around. I hollered at the top of my lungs, Rags, be quiet! After a while, Ralphie stopped screaming. Rags stopped barking. And Mr. Jordan just stood there with his hands on his hips. He looked at Ralphie. He looked at me. He looked at Rags. He looked at the Rice Krispies on the floor. Then his head swung back to Ralphie, then back to me. Mr. Jordan didn't move for a long time. He sighed. Then he ran his strong fingers over his mustache, and he sighed again. Is everyone calm? He finally asked. We nodded. Rags wagged. Ralph? Jigsaw? Mr. Jordan slowly said. I want you to come with me. And boys, he added, before leading us down the hall. "You had best clean up this mess in the morning." Finally, at long last, we fell asleep. All of us, me, Ralphie, and Rags, huddled together, snug as a bug in a rug, in Mr. Jordan's very crowded and very safe king-size bed. Chapter 10. Nature Detectives. I woke up early on Sunday. Mr. Jordan made waffles while Ralphie and I cleaned up Ralphie's room. Sweeping up all those Rice Krispies had made us very hungry. After breakfast, I went home because I needed a nap. On Monday, we headed to Four Rivers Nature Preserve on our field trip. I felt good to get away from the ghosts for a while. Mila sat next to me on the bus. "I think I saw something the other night," she told me, "in Ralphie's backyard." "What do you mean you saw something?" I asked. Mila leaned in close to me. "I kept trying to signal you with my flashlight, but you didn't answer, except for that one time." She paused. "I saw a shape moving around." "What kind of shape?" I asked. Mila shook her head. "I couldn't tell. It was too dark, but it might have been a person." "Or a ghost?" I added. The bus came to a stop. I was surprised when I saw our guide. I expected somebody with a big ranger hat, but this guy had a magnifying glass and a hat like Sherlock Holmes. His name was Hal Roberts. He brought us into the Nature Center. It was a small museum. In the back room, there was a large window overlooking a field. We all took turns with our binoculars, looking at the birds and the feeders. And the best part, though, was Aristotle. He was in the glass cage set into the wall. Mr. Roberts told us that Aristotle was a white-barred owl. He had a sad story. A couple of years ago, a nice lady found Aristotle on the side of the road. The owl had been hit by a car and was badly injured. She took Aristotle to the animal doctor. The doctor saved Aristotle's life. But Aristotle lost a wing in the accident and could never fly again. Now he lived at Four Rivers, stuck inside a cage for the rest of his life. I felt bad for Aristotle. Ralphie and I tried to cheer him up with a few hoots. Aristotle didn't give a hoot back. I guess we didn't blame him. Then we started our hike. It was called the Beaver Pond Trail. After a little while, Mr. Roberts made us stop and look at something. It was a pile of brown pellets. In other words, deer poop. Mr. Roberts told us we were very lucky. With all that rain this weekend, the ground is nice and muddy, perfect for animal tracks. He asked us to become nature detectives. We had to look around for signs of animal life. He called them clues. "I think I've found something," Mila shouted. "Good detective work," Mr. Roberts said. "This is an animal track." Mr. Roberts pointed out the hoof prints. He said it was a deer track. He poured plaster of Paris into the track. When the plaster hardens, it will form a mold. Then we can take it back to your classroom. "For keeps?" Geetha asked. "For keeps," Mr. Roberts answered. It was a great day. Mr. Roberts taught us how to look closely at things. He pointed to a row of holes in a tree. We had to guess what kind of animal made those holes. Helen Zuckerman guessed that it was a woodpecker, and she was right. After the hike, we had a big picnic. Mrs. Gleason let us run around and act wild. Then we had a scavenger hunt. We had to use our skills as nature detectives to find all sorts of things. I found something that told us that the wind was blowing. That was easy. The leaves on the trees. Mila found empty acorns. We drew the conclusion that they had been eaten by something, probably a squirrel. Ralphie even discovered a bird's nest. We weren't allowed to touch it. And in the end, we learned that nature tells us stories. But nature doesn't use words. Nature tells us in its own language. It really was like being a detective. If you looked at things closely enough, the clues would tell you a story. What kind of story could you tell today? Stay tuned. We'll finish the end of the book tomorrow.